স্বাধীনতার লড়াইয়ের শরিক মেয়েদের কথা, তাদের নিজেদের লেখা থেকে নিয়ে তৈরি অনেক পোস্টার আমরা করেছিলাম। তার থেকে 4টে আমি নিয়ে এসেছি। কল্পনা যোশী, রেবতী, মেরি কম আর বোধহয় পণ্ডিতা রামাবাই, 4টে পোস্টার আমি এনেছি। এই পোস্টারগুলোর উদ্দেশ্যই ছিল যে আমাদের যে বিভিন্ন স্কুল, কলেজ, সরকারি অফিস, আইন আদালত, এসব জায়গায় আমরা সাধারণত মহিষীদের ছবি তো টানানো দেখি। সেখানে মহিষী নারী বা স্মরণীয় নারীর মধ্যে খুব কম আমরা হয়তো মাদার টেরেসা, রোকেয়া এরকম 2-3 জনের দেখি, তার বাইরে আমরা দেখি না। তো যাতে পাবলিক ওয়াল, এই যে কলেজ, বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়, লাইব্রেরি, অন্যান্য প্রতিষ্ঠানের দেওয়ালে এরা স্থান পায়, সেই উদ্দেশ্যে পোস্টার আমি 4টে পোস্টার, কেউ যদি বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের তরফে এগুলো গ্রহণ করেন, আপনাদের যে ইতিহাস, মানবিকবিদ্যা চর্চা বা আপনার যে অফিস, ডিন অফিস বা ভাইস চ্যান্সেলর যেখানে হোক, আপনারা যদি ফ্রেম করে রাখেন, কার হাতে তুলে দেব? শোনা যাচ্ছে? আমি সকলকে নমস্কার। খুব ভালো লাগছে যে আজকে এই ডায়মন্ড হারবার মহিলা বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়, আমাদের পশ্চিমবঙ্গের প্রথম মেয়েদের জন্য যে বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়, তার বয়স অল্প, সে সবে কি বলবো, শৈশব থেকে কৈশোরে প্রবেশ করেছে বলা যায়, তার 10-11 বছর মাত্র বয়স। কিন্তু আমি মনে করি যে এই বিশ্ববিদ্যালয় এখানে স্থাপনা হয়েছে, আশেপাশের গ্রাম, এই জেলার অনেক মেয়েরা পড়তে আর পিজি স্তরে এবং রিসার্চের স্তরে আসার সুযোগ পাচ্ছে, এবং তাদের সামনে আজকে আমার বলার সুযোগ হয়েছে। এটা আমার পরম সৌভাগ্য, এবং আমি এই বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়কে এবং এদের মানবিক বিদ্যা চর্চা বিভাগকে বিশেষ করে ধন্যবাদ জানাতে চাই। এবং অবশ্যই আমার এটা কি বলবো, এই সৌভাগ্য খুব কমই আসে যে এমন একজন মানুষ, ডক্টর কাদম্বিনী গঙ্গোপাধ্যায়ের মতো প্রাতঃস্মরণীয় মানুষ, তার স্মৃতিতে এই বক্তৃতা যে সিরিজ, তার 3য় বক্তৃতায় আমি আসতে পারলাম, আহত হলাম, সেটাও আমার কাছে একটা বিশাল ব্যাপার। তো খুবই ভালো লাগছে। এইটা আমি মাইকটা না হাতে নিয়ে নিই, কেননা তাহলে আমার একটু সুবিধে হবে। আচ্ছা, আজকের বক্তৃতাটা আমি ইংরেজিতেই লেখা, আমার মানে বক্তৃতা মতো করে, মানে আমি চেষ্টা করেছি যতটা সম্ভব সহজ ইংরেজিতে লেখা, যেটাকে বলে খুব একটা জার্গনের মধ্যে আমি যাইনি, খুব একটা তাত্ত্বিক আলোচনা ইংরেজিতে আমি তুলিনি, যাতে করে আজকে যারা ছাত্রী উপস্থিত হয়েছেন তারা ইংরেজিতে হলেও তারা তার রসগ্রহণ করতে পারেন এবং তাদের পক্ষে সহজবোধ্য হয়। সেভাবেই আমি কিছু মানে খানিকটা গল্পের মতো করে কিছু উপাদান, কিছু সূত্র এক জায়গায় করার চেষ্টা করেছি, যাতে তারা সেটা ভেতরে নিতে যদি পারেন, তাদের মনে যদি তার থেকে প্রশ্ন আসে, সে প্রশ্ন যদি বক্তৃতার পর কিছুক্ষণ আমি প্রস্তুত আছি প্রশ্নোত্তর পর্ব, যদি যেটা দিশারি আমার পরিচয় পায়নো বলার সময় বলেছে, সেটার জন্য আমি গ্রান্টও পেয়েছিলাম। আমার পেয়েছিলাম সেই সুবাদে। তো এটা ইনস্টিটিউট অফ ডেভেলপমেন্ট স্টাডিজ কলকাতা, IDSK বলে যে গবেষণামূলক প্রতিষ্ঠান কলকাতায়, তাদের সহায়তায়, তাদের প্রজেক্টটা সেই সময় নেওয়া হয়েছিল এবং 4-5 জন তার অংশীদার ছিলাম, আমিও তার মধ্যে ছিলাম। এবং আমি সেই জন্য IDSK কে আমার কৃতজ্ঞতা জানাতে চাই, এবং বিশেষভাবে আমি স্মরণ করছি IDSK এর ফাউন্ডার ডিরেক্টর অধ্যাপক অমিয় কুমার বাগচি, যিনি আপনারা জানেন কয়েকদিন আগে সদ্য প্রয়াত হয়েছেন, তিনি এবং তার স্ত্রী অধ্যাপক যশোধরা বাগচি, যার আমি ছাত্রী ছিলাম, এই দুজনের পরামর্শ, স্নেহ, আশীর্বাদ আমি পেয়েছি। সেটা আমার জীবনের একটা পরম প্রাপ্তি। এদেরকে আমি আজকে স্মরণ করতে চাই এবং এই কাজটা করার সময়, এটা একটা বড় কাজ ছিল, তার একটা অংশ আজকে বলবো। এই কাজটা করার সময় অনেকের সঙ্গে, অনেক স্কুলের প্রাক্তনীদের সঙ্গে, মানে যে স্কুলগুলো নিয়ে আমি দেখেছিলাম ইতিহাস, প্রাক্তনীদের সঙ্গে কথা বলেছিলাম, যারা তখনও আমাদের মধ্যে ছিলেন, 2010, 11, 12, 13 অনেকেই ছিলেন, এপার বাংলা ওপার বাংলা। তো তাদের সকলকে আমি স্মরণ করছি, যারা আমাকে সে সময় দিয়েছিলেন, আমাকে বিশ্বাস করে আমার সঙ্গে তাদের কথা ভাগ করে নিয়েছিলেন। বিশেষ করে আমি বলতে চাই শ্রীলা সেন, সাখাওয়াত মেমোরিয়াল স্কুলের প্রাক্তনী, আমার বিশেষ বন্ধু অভিক সেনের মা। আজকে অভিকও নেই, শ্রীলা সেন মাসিমাও নেই। এরা দুজনে আমাকে বিরাট উৎসাহ দিয়েছিলেন। এছাড়া গোখলে স্কুলের প্রাক্তনী নবনীতা দেব সেন, শান্তনা লাহিড়ী, বাণী চক্রবর্তী, ইন্দিরা গুপ্ত, অপর্ণা বাসু, এরা ছিলেন। আবার সাখাওয়াত মেমোরিয়ালের লতিফা আকান, সুলতানা জামান, সৈয়দা গানি, নাসিমা দে এবং আরো অনেকের সঙ্গে কথা বলার সৌভাগ্য হয়েছিল। তো আমি সকলকে একটু তাই স্মরণ করলাম শুরু করার আগে। আচ্ছা, এবারে ছাত্রীদের জিজ্ঞেস করছি, তোমরা সবাই কি রবীন্দ্রনাথের গোরা উপন্যাস পড়েছো? কেউ কি পড়েছো? আচ্ছা, তো না পড়ে থাকলে গোরা উপন্যাসটা আমি তোমাদেরকে পড়ার অনুরোধ জানাচ্ছি। তার কারণ আমি শুরুই করছি গোরা উপন্যাসের রেফারেন্স টেনে। তোমাদের পড়া থাকলে একটু সুবিধে হতো, কিন্তু গোরা তো পাওয়া যায়, মানে বইটাও পাওয়া যায় এবং ডিজিটালিও পাওয়া যায় আজকাল, পাওয়ার কোনো অসুবিধা নেই। তোমরা একটু ফিরে পড়ে দেখো, সেটাই আমি বলছি। এবার আমি মানে গোরা থেকে, মূল বাংলা থেকে আমি একটু অংশ একটু পড়ছি, খুব সামান্যই, তারপরে আমি ইংরেজি প্রবন্ধটায় চলে যাব। দুজন নায়িকা, তোমরা যারা পড়নি তাদের জন্য বলছি, ললিতা এবং সুচরিতা, গোরা উপন্যাসের বলতে পারো দুজন সহনায়িকা। ললিতা ইউরোপের লোক হিতৈষিণী রমণীদের জীবনচরিতে যে সকল কীর্তি কাহিনী পাঠ করিয়াছিল, সেইগুলি তাহার নিজের পক্ষে সাধ্য ও সম্ভবপর বলিয়া মনে হইতে লাগিল। একদিন সে পরেশবাবুকে গিয়া কহিল, এরা গ্রাম্য সমাজে, ঠিক আছে, পরেশবাবু, ললিতা, এরা পরেশবাবুকে গিয়া কহিল, বাবা, আমি কি কোনো মেয়ে স্কুলে শেখাবার ভার নিতে পারিনি? পরেশবাবু তাহার মেয়ের মুখের দিকে চাহিয়া দেখিলেন। ক্ষুধাতুর হৃদয়ের বেদনায় তাহার সপরুণ দুটি চক্ষু যেন কাঙাল হইয়া এই প্রশ্ন জিজ্ঞাসা করিতেছে। তিনি স্নিগ্ধ স্বরে কহিলেন, কেন পারবে না মা? কিন্তু তেমন মেয়ে স্কুল কোথায়? যে সময়ের কথা হইতেছে তখন মেয়ে স্কুল বেশি ছিল না, সামান্য পাঠশালা ছিল এবং ভদ্রঘরের মেয়েরা শিক্ষয়িত্রীর কাজে তখন অগ্রসর হন নাই। ললিতা ব্যাকুল হইয়া কহিল, স্কুল নেই বাবা? পরেশবাবু কহিলেন, কই দেখিনি তো। ললিতা কহিল, আচ্ছা বাবা, মেয়ে স্কুল কি একটা করা যায় না? পরেশবাবু কহিলেন, অনেক খরচের কথা এবং অনেক লোকের সহায়তা চাই। একটু গ্যাপ দিয়ে আরেকটা অংশ। সেই দিনই মধ্যাহ্নে ললিতা সুচরিতার বাড়ি আসিয়া উপস্থিত হইল। ললিতার মনে যে কথাটা ছিল সুচরিতার কাছে বসিয়া সে একেবারেই তাহা আরম্ভ করিয়া দিল। সে কহিল, সুচি দিদি, আমাদের পাড়ায় মেয়েদের জন্য যদি একটা স্কুল করা যায় তাহলে কেমন হয়? হরিমোহিনী অবাক হইয়া কহিলেন, শোনো একবার কথা, তোমরা স্কুল করবে কি? সুচরিতা কহিল, কেমন করে করা যাবে বল, কে আমাদের সাহায্য করবে? বাবাকে বলেছিস কি? ললিতা কহিল, আমরা দুজনে তো পড়াতে পারবো, হয়তো বড়দিদিও রাজি হবে। সুচরিতা কহিল, শুধু পড়ানো নিয়ে তো আর কথা নয়, কিরকম করে স্কুল চালাতে হবে তার সব নিয়ম বেঁধে দেওয়া চাই, বাড়ি ঠিক করতে হবে, ছাত্রী সংগ্রহ করতে হবে, খরচ জোগাতে হবে, আমরা দুজন মেয়ে মানুষের কি করতে পারি? ললিতা কহিল, দিদি, ও কথা বললে চলবে না। মেয়ে মানুষ হয়ে জন্মেছি বলেই কি নিজের মনখানাকে নিয়ে ঘরের মধ্যে পড়ে আছাড় খেতে থাকবো? পৃথিবীর কোনো কাজেই লাগবো না? ললিতার কথাটার মধ্যে যে বেদনা ছিল, সুচরিতার বুকের মধ্যে গিয়া তাহা বাজিয়া উঠিল। সে কোনো উত্তর না করিয়া ভাবিতে লাগিল। আমি একটু পড়লাম, যেহেতু দেখলাম ছাত্রীরা গোড়া উপন্যাস তাদের পড়া নেই, তা আমি ভাবলাম একটু অংশ পড়ি। যাই হোক, এবার শুরু করছি কাদম্বিনী's Friends and the Making of Two Schools for Modern Indian Girls. In Rabindranath Thakur's novel Gora, after the young Brahmo girl Lolita had taken a steamer ride from a district town back to Calcutta with a very eligible Hindu bachelor Binoy, the Brahmo Samaj became rife with rumors about the duo. Some time after her return to the city, Lolita had expressed the desire to start a school for girls to her liberal reformist father Paresh Babu, who was a devout Brahmo and yet non-sectarian in character. Agreeing wholeheartedly, Paresh Babu, however, warned Lolita that not only would it require ample financial resources, but also the support of a whole lot of people. Lolita's friends and adopted sister Sucharita too were skeptical at first of how the two of them would raise funds, find students, and administer a school. Sucharita's aunt, the austere Hindu widow Harimohini, found it atrocious that Sucharita and Lolita could think of teaching in a school, something that only Christian women did. But Lolita and Sucharita decided that they could start by offering free schooling to girls of the neighborhood, and this would involve no extra cost if classes were held in a spare room in Sucharita's house. Determined to go ahead, the two young women made an ingenious plan to find students for their school. They decided to use the informal network among women of the neighborhood that thrived on exchanges across roofs and terraces. Employing Lolita's younger sister Lavanya to spread the word from roof to roof, they tidied a room and waited eagerly for little girls to turn up. But soon they realized that the patriarchs of the Hindu families in the vicinity did not take kindly to the idea that young girls from their families would be under the influence of Brahmo women during school hours. With no hope of Hindu girls turning up, Lolita decided to scout for students from those Brahmo families which did not have the means to send their daughters to the well-known Bethune school. Soon the school began with 5 or 6 Brahmo girls, but within a few days the girls started dropping out one by one until one day no one came. After visiting each of her pupils, Lolita finally gathered that those Brahmo families had reservations about sending their wards to a school lodged in a household where Hindu gods were worshipped daily by Sucharita's aunt Harimohini. Besides, it was soon discovered that Haran, the self-employed moral guardian of the Brahmo Samaj, had gone about spreading canards about Lolita and Binoy and warned the Brahmos that the Hindu Binoy was likely to be closely involved in running of the girls' school. Disgusted with the meanness and bigotry of the likes of Haran, Lolita thought it would be an excellent idea to have the counsel of someone as cultured as Binoy in the running of the school and in spreading the good word among the Hindus. This would no doubt cause further complications in the plot of the novel, but we need not concern ourselves with the rest of the plot here. By using this as a prelude, Lolita and Sucharita's attempt to start a school in the novel that was published serially between 1907 and 1909 in the leading Bengali literary journal Probashi. My intention is to evoke some of the complexities entrenching middle-class girls schooling in Bengal at a time when the first generation of educated Indian women were beginning to take it upon themselves to advance the cause of female education. I also wish to particularly draw your attention to the fact that sectarian politics of the kind we have just seen in Gora played no mean role in fashioning the identities of most girls' schools run by different communities in the province in the late 19th and early 20th century. It is worth recalling that one of the principal objectives of the Brahmo Balika Shikshalaya, founded in 1890, run by liberal Brahmo reformers, was to infuse the ideals of the Brahmo-syncretic faith in the minds of its pupils, and the school was reluctant to recruit non-Brahmo principals and hostel superintendents in its first phase in a bid to maintain Brahmo purity. When Rabindranath was writing Gora, the newly formed Ladies' Committee of Brahmo Balika Shikshalaya, led by Sarala Rai, the poet's close friend and classmate of Kadambini Ganguly, her schoolmate. She was trying hard to break the sectarian stranglehold on the school in the face of fierce opposition from some influential Brahmo leaders. Her pioneering efforts to restructure the school met with so much initial opposition that she resigned as secretary of the Ladies' Committee of Brahmo Balika Shikshalaya in 1906. On the other hand, a school like Mahakali Pathshala, founded in 1893 in the high noon of Hindu revivalism in India, had begun doing extremely well for itself in the first decade of the 20th century. Begun for Hindu girls by Mataji Taposhini in Calcutta, it grew and prospered to have 450 students on its roll by 1903, which was far in excess of the number enrolled in the Bethune school at that time. The founder was well versed in Sanskrit and the ancient scriptures, as the school's objective was to shield Hindu girls from disorienting alien influences like those of missionaries, Indian Christians, and Western educated Brahmos, inculcate in them good, within quotes, Hindu values and make them aware of sacrosanct Brahmanical practices. It earned the approval of large sections of the Hindu public and the backing of no less a person than Swami Vivekananda, who thought all those who desired to see their daughters educated on national lines ought to support Mahakali Pathshala. In the context of emergence of school as a major site for reinforcing the cultural distinctiveness of each religious community, এ পর্যন্ত মোটামুটি বোঝা গেছে তো? প্রত্যেকটা স্কুল তাদের একটা স্কুলগুলো যারা শুরু করছেন তারা কোনো না কোনো ধর্মীয় সম্প্রদায় থেকে আসছেন, তারা সেই সম্প্রদায়ের ধর্মীয় সাংস্কৃতিক বৈশিষ্ট্যগুলো কিভাবে স্কুলগুলোর মধ্যে দিয়ে কোনো সময় খুব গোড়াভাবে কট্টরভাবে তুলে ধরতে চাইছিলেন, রক্ষা করতে চাইছিলেন, সেটা নিয়ে বলছি। So in this context, tracing the trajectory of two pioneering modern educational institutions founded in Calcutta by the real-life Lolitas and Sucharitas thus assumes immense significance. I am referring here to the Sakhawat Memorial Girls' School founded by Begum Ruqya Sakhawat Hussain in 1911 and the Gokhale Memorial Girls' School founded by Sarala Rai in 1920. In the first part of my talk, I will briefly discuss both Sarala Rai's and Begum Ruqya's background and educational ideals. In the next two sections, I would trace the histories of the two schools founded by them, first talking about Gokhale Memorial and then about Sakhawat Memorial, and in the process, try to grasp the tensions between conformity and resistance in the journeys of the early years of these two pioneering institutions. একটু ব্রেক নিয়ে জল খাচ্ছি, হ্যাঁ? প্রথম এই সেকশনটার নাম দিয়েছি দ্য ইস্ট অ্যান্ড দ্য ওয়েস্ট, পূর্ব ও পশ্চিম। Sharula Rai and Ruqya Sakhawat Hussain, who knew each other closely as educational workers, they call themselves educational workers, since 1910, were born and raised very differently in late 19th century Bengal. Being the eldest daughter of Durga Mohan Das, a leading Brahmo reformer, who was a champion of women's education and widow remarriage, Sharula not only got the benefit of her home education being supervised by her father, but also got the chance of school education. Besides, she was exposed to the social changes that her father and his close friend Darukanath Ganguly were initiating through taking a radical position on the debates over the nature and extent of education necessary for women. They were opposed to the idea of a separate curriculum for girls, preferred amongst others by the Brahmo leader Keshav Chandra Sen, which was designed to not expose them to the rigors of science and mathematics. Das and Ganguly collaborated with the British educator Annette Ackroyd in the founding of Hindu Mohila Vidyalaya in Calcutta in 1871. In this school, which Sharula and her sisters attended, girls were taught subjects like mathematics and physical science, in addition to geography, history, Bengali, English, and needlework. In 1876, when the collaboration between Ackroyd and the Brahmo reformers ended, Darukanath Ganguly continued to run the school, which was now known as the Bongo Mohila Vidyalaya. Here, the general curriculum followed was similar to the boys' school, and the government soon recognized it as the most advanced school in Bengal in every sense. Sharula and her classmate Kadambini were especially prepared for the university entrance exam by Ganguly, and after a special committee of eminent scholars set up by the government examined them in 1877, the duo were deemed fit to sit for the entrance examination of the Calcutta University, at a time when no leading British university had opened its door to women. While Kadambini passed the entrance examination and went on to become a doctor, Sharula's marriage at the age of 16 cut short her formal education. However, her early exposure to the ideology of equal education for the sexes were to be of profound significance when she emerged as an educationist a couple of decades later. Besides, Sharula's marriage to the Western-educated professor of philosophy, P.K. Ray, facilitated socialization with liberal intellectuals and helped her in informally acquiring many associational skills. She put them to good use when she first started a women's association in Dhaka, then formed the Shokhi Shomiti with Sharna Kumari Devi in Calcutta, the Indian Women's Education Association in 1912 in London, the Gokhale Memorial School in Calcutta, and finally took a leading role in constituting the Bengal Women's Education League and the All India Women's Conference in 1957.
সুইচ বন্ধ করতে হবে, এটা সুইচটা বন্ধ করলে
না, এই ফ্যানটা জ্বলছে, ফ্যানের সুইচটা অফ করতে হবে। সবকটাই অফ করে দিচ্ছি, তাহলে সুইচ অফ না করলে
বসে বসে সব কান বন্ধ করে দেওয়া হয়েছে। বসে পড়ো, কোনো অসুবিধা নেই, বসে পড়ো।
তাহলে আবার শুরু করবো। Unlike Sharula, Rukia was a girl child of a high-born Ashraf family with land holdings in East Bengal. The family took pride in strictly secluding its girls and offering them only some rudimentary training in parroting the Quran without the knowledge of Arabic. Rukia and her sisters never had a chance of going to school, though her brothers were sent to school and later to St. Xavier's College in Calcutta. Rukia learned English from her elder brother Ibrahim Sabir, and these lessons were given to her mainly at night to keep it a secret from the larger family. Recognizing Rukia's quest for knowledge, it was the same brother who found a suitable groom for his sister in Syed Sakhawat Hussain, a government servant who had been trained in agriculture in England and who respected women's right to education. Rukia moved to her husband's workplace in Bhagalpur of Bihar and was encouraged in her literary efforts by Sakhawat Hussain. From the beginning of the 20th century, she started contributing polemical pieces in Bengali to periodicals like Nobonur and Mohila, and a piece of utopian literature, Sultana's Dream, written in English to the Indian Ladies magazine. আমি একটু সংক্ষেপ করতে করতে যাচ্ছি। She knew nothing about administering a school, framing a curriculum, and pedagogic practices, and in her own words, quote, "When I first started the school with 5 students, I had no idea how a single teacher could teach 5 pupils at the same time," unquote. To gain first-hand knowledge of how a modern girls' school was run, she sought out leading educational workers upon her arrival in Calcutta after her husband's death, and that is how Sharula Rai and Rukia Sakhawat Hussain met. The friendship forged between the two lasted lifelong, and Sharula Rai, who was closely associated with the Brahmo Balika Shikshalay at that time, made it possible for Rukia to observe closely the running of that school when the latter was about to start her own school. Rukia's untiring efforts to educate herself were also significantly aided by her elder sister Karimunnisa, who Rukia thought was a hidden gem. Karimunnisa had learnt Bengali on her own at a time when aristocratic Muslims considered learning a Hindu language a blasphemy. Braving immense opposition from relatives and friends who could come to terms with a Muslim girl learning Urdu and Persian at home but never Bengali, it was Karimunnisa who inculcated in Rukia the love of their mother tongue in childhood. In spite of the fact that Sharula's and Rukia's gender identities were internally differentiated to such an extent by other categories of identity like community and religion, both of them were subjects of the British Empire, and both belonged to different sections of the colonized elite that believed that the culturally emancipated Indian woman should combine what is morally and socially acceptable from the modern West with the ideals of womanhood valued in ancient India. To recover the severe loss of self-esteem suffered at the hands of the colonizers, the Hindu elite had constructed a glorious tradition of Hindu-Aryan identity, and in this context, the myth of the ancient Vedic woman as the highest symbol of Hindu womanhood flourished since the mid-19th century. The Muslim elite had, like their Hindu compatriots, constructed a glorious past for Islam, in which Muslim women enjoyed a high status and freedom like their high caste Vedic sisters. Having to prove themselves both to their imperial masters and to the more advanced Brahmos and Hindus, an Islamic past of power and glory was upheld in late 19th and early 20th century tracts, and learned women from the golden age of Islam and from Islamic countries of the contemporary world were projected as role models. Both the Hindu and the Muslim modernizing bourgeoisie sought in the modern Indian woman an amalgamation of the high-minded, learned, and self-sacrificing woman of the golden past, and the orderly, thrifty, benevolent Victorian woman who could make the home a haven for man and cooperate in the furtherance of her husband's career. It needs to be emphasized that these expectations were rooted in the ideology of separate spheres of work for men and women and on the gendered construction of masculinity and femininity. Accordingly, enlightened home management was designated as an elite woman's primary responsibility, the neglect of which could invalidate her right to serve society in the role of improvers for the lot of women and children. From this subject position, both Rokia and Charula, who strove to empower their sisters through education, believed that the educational ideals for the modern Indian woman should, within quotes, assimilate the old while holding on to the new. In the words of Charula Rai, quote, "The type of womanhood we aim at producing through our training is a combination of the best of the East and West," unquote. In her school, she wanted to equip the girls with, quote, "the knowledge of their own traditions, their own characteristic virtues of Eastern womanhood, as well as that of the virtues of Western women's domestic, social, and civic life," unquote. This educational practice would not only help girls attain university degrees, but according to Charula, develop them as, quote, "right citizens, capable home builders, and conscientious workers," unquote. No wonder that parents who were against convent education in Loreto or diocesan schools wanted a modern education and English medium training for their girls chose the Gokhale Memorial School. Professor Aparna Basu, who went to this school in the late 1930s and early 1940s, and whose parents were Gandhians, writes that her family did not want to send the daughters to a convent because, quote, "they disapproved of the cultural drawbacks and snobbishness of such schools which alienated children from their own culture and turned them into little memsahibs," unquote. In the Sakhawat Memorial School too, Rokia sought elements of value in India's heritage and wanted to modify ancient practices to suit modern conditions of life. She wanted to set before Indian girls, quote, "the great and noble ideals of the past," unquote, and felt that, quote, "India must retain the elements of good in her age-old traditions of thought and methods, while at the same time, by incorporating that which is useful from the West, a new educational practice and tradition may be evolved, which will transcend both that of the East and the West," unquote. She wanted her school to impart such an education that would develop the physical, moral, and mental faculties of a child along modern lines and at the same time prevent, within quotes, "slavish imitations of Western customs and traditions," which turned the convent-educated Jainabs into Jennies and made them lose all respect for their culture and religion. In her school, this meant not only offering Muslim women a modern curriculum and arranging extracurricular activities like music and sports so that they could match up to the educational attainments and socio-political visibility of middle-class Hindu, Brahmo, and Christian women, but also educating girls to rationally interpret religion, counter critiques of the status of women in Islam, and inculcate in them the right values enshrined in learned women from the golden past who had been, quote, "obedient daughters, loving sisters, dutiful wives, and instructive mothers," unquote. Apart from their commonality in building educational institutions that would synthesize the East and the West, both Rokia and Charula were also extremely non-sectarian human beings and believed in forging a secular sisterhood to address the violation of rights of women, including the right to education across communities and religion. It is important to remember that in the late 1920s, when Rokia and Charula started working, along with women from other communities and denominations, in the Bengal Women's Education League, Bongio Nari Shikkha Samiti bole jeta amra jani, to influence government policy on women's education in Bengal. It was at this time that the clash of interest between middle-class Hindus and Muslims was growing sharper in the province, with the threat of Muslim predominance in Bengal politics looming large. The vernacular media was using women as victims to legitimize a united communal bloc against the other. It was at such a time that, addressing the first Bengal Women's Education Conference in 1927, Rokeya had identified the creature that was worst off in India as the Indian woman, for whom nobody seemed to spare a thought and no hearts bled, though there were enough associations to plead for the welfare of animals. এই বঙ্গীয় নারী শিক্ষা সমিতির সভাপতির অধিবেশনে এই কথাটাই উনি বলেছিলেন যে ভারতবর্ষে সর্বাপেক্ষা নিকৃষ্ট জীব কাহারা জানেন? সেই জীব ভারত নারী। পশুর জন্য চিন্তা করিবারও লোক আছে, কিন্তু আমাদের ন্যায় অবরোধ বন্দিনী নারী জাতির জন্য কাঁদিবার জন্য একটিও লোক নাই ভূভারতে। বাংলাটা থেকে কোট করলাম। Community identity of oppressed women had always taken a back seat with her, and in one of her early essays entitled The Worship of Women, Nari Puja bole Rokeyaর 1906 সালে লেখা একটা অসাধারণ প্রবন্ধ আছে। Rokeya lets Brahmo, Hindu and Muslim women emerge in a conversation to expose how religion camouflages the patriarchal exploitation of women. এই নারী পূজা প্রবন্ধটা যদি তোমরা ছাত্রীরা পড়ো তাহলে দেখবে সেখানে 4-5 জন মহিলা, মিসেস প্রভা চ্যাটার্জি, কারোর নাম কুসুম কুমারী রায়, কেউ আমেনা বেগম, কেউ জামিলা বেগম, এরা পরস্পরের মধ্যে একসাথে বসে আলোচনা করছে যে সমস্ত ধর্মই কিভাবে, এক একটা ধর্ম যে যার ধর্মের কথা বলছে, কিভাবে মেয়েদের পায়ের তলায় দাবিয়ে রেখেছে। খুব সুন্দর, খুব আজকেও বিশেষ প্রাসঙ্গিক এই আলোচনা। After Rokeya's untimely demise in 1932, her friend Sharola, presiding over a public meeting held in her memory, had remembered Rokeya as someone, quote, with a very large heart. To her, Hindu and Muslim had no difference, and I too, from childhood, knew no difference, unquote. Sharola too had pointed out that to India's great shame and misfortune, the leaders of our own communities thought women were so insignificant as to believe that they deserved nothing better than, quote, the gift of saris and jewels for decoration, and felt a kind of pity and kindness towards women's apparent helpless condition, unquote. For Sharola, patriotism was synonymous with working towards the improvement of her own sex, and for the sake of the love of one's motherland, she urged privileged Indian women to come together and start a ladies' philanthropic association in which ladies from all parts of India, irrespective of any denominational differences, would work for helping their, within quotes, helpless sisters. While she proposed that the association would offer residential courses to educate and technically train oppressed and deserted women from all communities to support themselves, Sharola was categorical in stating that, quote, the principal thing that is wanted is our united sympathy and cooperation for improving the social and economic status of women, and the association would in no way promote any particular religious propaganda, unquote. We shall see later how these values of hers were enshrined in the educational institutions that Sharola founded for women. Her friend Rokeya, whose school operated under very different conditions from Sharola's, had to restrict admission of students to the Muslim community only for reasons that would emerge gradually in the course of this essay. However, she lovingly nurtured oppressed women of all communities, and many women whose families had shut the door on them or who had themselves walked out of Hindu, Muslim or Eurasian homes found refuge with Rokia and became a part of the school community. Rokia also answered Sharala's conceptualization of a secular sisterhood through her utopian fiction, Padmarag, the Ruby, where women from different races and communities who have been cast out by patriarchal society finds love, peace, and solidarity in a residential institution called Tarini Bhavan. Let us now see to what extent Sharala and Rokia were able to translate their educational ideals through their schools founded for the education of, within quotes, modern Indian girls. সময় আছে তো? একটু সময় লাগবে। পরের সেকশনটার নাম Towards a Nation of Citizens. Sharala Rai started Gokhale Memorial School on April 8, 1920 in a small rented house in Bhawanipur. It opened residential facilities for its students right from inception and until the school shifted to a larger rented house on Lansdowne Road. The boarder stayed with Sharala Rai in her Baligan Circular Road house under her personal care. Sharala was well connected with eminent and resourceful people like Lord S.P. Sinha and Sir R.N. Mukherjee, who helped the school financially. The school moved to its new building on Horish Mukherjee Road in March 1930 with a boarding on the top floor. This was after Sharala Rai was able to acquire a plot of land on leasehold from the army and raise resources for the building through donations and through public performances of plays and dance dramas in which pupils of Gokhale Memorial School participated. One such performance of Tagore's dance drama, Mayar Khala, held in New Empire in 1928, saw a few talented young women from leading Brahmo and Hindu families of Calcutta take to the public stage at that time. The participation of the Tagores and members of other leading elite families in the production of such plays acted as an assurance for parents of young girls studying in Gokhale Memorial, who let their children perform without the fear of social stigma. In any case, only children from well-off families could attend the school with a monthly fee as high as 10 rupees in the 1920s. Two of its oldest students remember it was not easy to gain admission here unless the school authorities were convinced of a child's family background. The school prepared its first batch of students for the matriculation in 1930, but as it was yet to be recognized by the government as a secondary school, the candidates successfully appeared in private and continued to do so till 1940, when the Education Department finally granted its recognition. Sharala was deeply engaged with the modernist invention of the child and of childhood, and in Gokhale Memorial School she tried to introduce new pedagogic practices that would reduce the load of textbooks on students. Quote, create a taste and desire for knowledge in a child and not merely help her pass public examinations, unquote. To that end, she laid great emphasis on teacher training and formed the Indian Women's Education Association in London a few years before the Gokhale Memorial was founded. This association helped to fund Indian women desirous of pursuing teacher training courses in England, and it is through this association that she met the young Bengali Christian woman Shamsohagini Emily Rani Ghosh, a graduate from Diocesan College who took her teacher's diploma from London University and did a course on psychology and pedagogy from Edinburgh University. She was to later become Sharala's closest associate and the legendary principal Rani Ghosh of Gokhale Memorial School since its inception. In her recommendations to the Female Education Committee of Eastern Bengal and Assam, Sharala stressed the need for setting up teacher training colleges in the province, arguing that a taste of learning in pupils could be developed only if teachers were properly qualified, the right equipment was supplied to them, and the right subjects selected for them. She was also unequivocal on the need to recruit only women teachers for teaching and administering girls' schools, because Male teachers, according to her, were, quote, ignorant of the peculiarities of girls entering puberty and might throw slates at girls or punch their heads as they were used to do in boys' schools, unquote. Besides, it was important for Sharula that in a society where Porda system is so strong and education amongst women so unpopular, mothers of girls take an interest in their children's education, and for that she suggested that schools be made more friendly and accessible to them, and female staff be the prerogative of girls' school. At the cost of getting mired in controversy, Sharula exercised significant public agency as secretary of the Ladies' Committee of Brahmo Balika Shikhalaya in 1906, something I referred to at the beginning, by inducting the first lady principal and more women teachers in school more than a decade before she founded her new school. Later, as the first woman member of the Senate of Calcutta University, she strove to establish a separate training college for women teachers. When her school was in its early years, women in large numbers across the country, including Sharula and Rukia, campaigned for the Child Marriage Restraint Bill and accused the colonial state of obstructionist policies that were responsible for their social backwardness. With the passing of the Sharda Act of 1929, Sharula felt that by abolishing, quote, early marriage, we are taking tremendous responsibility of the adolescent period of a girl's life, unquote. But also, therefore, not only was it important to develop girls' quote, thoughts and ideals as right citizens, but also as capable home builders, unquote, so that they could achieve a fine balance between domestic responsibilities and social ones. The founder herself was a shining example of such perfect balance. Her granddaughter Renuka Ray recalled a unique sight that met visitors to Sharula's house in the early years of the school. They would find the 60-year-old Sharula seated in the veranda on a low stool, cutting vegetables on a moti with a large number of vegetable baskets by her side. These vegetables were not only to be cooked for her family, but for all the boarders of the school. While cutting vegetables, she would also dictate to a stenographer some intricate matters regarding educational policy or official correspondence of the school. Since she led by example and felt that those who taught girls had to have training through which they could produce self-respecting individuals with independence of thought as well as appropriate domestic and social graces. Shantana Lahiri, an old Gokulite of the 1930s, recalled in a conversation to me that once she was stopped in the tracks by the principal Rani Ghosh as she was stumping down the school stairs and gently instructed to come down like a young lady. Sharula Ray's and Rani Ghosh's belief in the equal status of men and women at home and in society was premised on an assertion of essential difference between the sexes. So teaching young girls to be feminine and helping them acquire skills in home management were no less important. Domestic science, including laundry, found a place in the school curriculum simultaneously with mathematics and physical science, history, geography, 3 languages, and a good deal of outdoor games and sports. And above all, Gokhale teachers served as role models not only for their excellence in teaching, but by leaving a strong impression in the younger minds that education in a woman is not wasted and does not make her less womanly, within quotes. I had mentioned earlier that it wasn't easy to get admitted to Gokhale Memorial unless one's family credential, that is to say class and educational background, were found to be impressive by the governing body. But community or religion was never a factor in getting admission to the school. On the contrary, the constitution of the school emphasized its non-denominational character and was one of the first schools in the country to do so. It is of no small significance that a year after the Memorandum of Association of the Gokhale Memorial Girls' School declared in 1929 that it would, quote, promote better education of Indian girls on a non-denominational basis, irrespective of caste, creed, and sect, unquote. The Brahmo Balika Shikhalaya, which was then being steered by Sharula's younger sister Abula Bose, and had been admitting students from all communities for a few years then, formally added a clause to the Brahmo Balika Shikhalaya constitution that said doors of the Shikhalaya would be open to students irrespective of caste, creed, or religion. So first it was Gokhale and then Brahmo Balika made this constitutional amendment. The school was a memorial to Gopal Krishna Gokhale, a close friend of Sharula Ray, who considered Bengal his second home and was an ardent advocate of school for girls. Gokhale was also a scholar and moderate politician who believed that India should look beyond the division of caste and community in order to create a nation of citizens. For him and for his friend Sharula, nation building meant taking up the challenge of transforming India from a society of castes and communities into a nation of citizens. They took it upon themselves to prove to the world that the colonial representation of India as a society of castes and communities and not a nation of citizens was fundamentally wrong. The Gokhale Memorial School was a secular project designed to weaken the role of caste and community so that citizens enjoyed certain fundamental rights without consideration of race, caste, or community. There was no place for provincialism in the school, and all students had to learn 3 languages, Bengali, Hindi, and English. Teachers were recruited from different parts of India, and there were quite a few Anglo-Indian, Jewish, and European teachers as well. Students came from all communities, which included a handful of Muslim girls from very well-known families. No religious festivals were observed in the school, and tenets from no particular religion preached. Instead, a subject called comparative religion was introduced, which made the senior students aware of the spiritual teachings of different religions of the world and awakened in them, quote, the love for truth and justice and the spirit of idealism, unquote. These comparative religion classes were also used to introduce the idea of intercaste and interprovincial marriages. In other words, they were taught to be Indians and to identify strong threads of unity and sameness running through the entire landmass. In the process, 2 generations of Gokhleites produced between the 1920s and the 1940s grew up as non-sectarian human beings respecting equal rights of his citizens, irrespective of caste, creed, religion. However, the idealized space that the Gokhale Memorial School tried to create occluded at the same time the reality of many Indias where the poor, the untouchables, the low castes, and many categories of minorities and marginalized lived. The school tried to be representative of all of India's people and their aspirations, when in actuality it was not. If there was a bomb scare in Calcutta during the Second World War, the school could afford to move to the founder's personal estate in Hazaribagh for a couple of years with its elite group of students and teachers. In times of riot, unlike Sakhawat Memorial, this school did not have to shut down for long periods and lose many students each time it reopened, because Gokhale students belonged mostly to the well-off Hindu Brahmo families who usually lived in those parts of the city that were not seized by communal violence in the riot-torn 40s. With the birth of the 2 nations post-partition, while one school went through a major restructuring with the migration of Muslim students and teachers to Pakistan, the other school remained largely unaffected by the upheaval caused by partition and the refugee movement. Rather, in the new nation state, which guaranteed constitutional equality to all its citizens, irrespective of religion, race, caste, or sex, Gokhleites were in a much better position to take advantage of the right to equality in a highly unequal situation and marched ahead in different fields as distinguished achievers. আচ্ছা, আমি এখানে থামতে পারি, এটা সময়ের উপরে, কারণ অনেকটা সময় পেরিয়ে গেছে যেহেতু, সেই জন্য আপনারা বলুন যে এখানে থামবো নাকি সাখাওয়াত মেমোরিয়ালের ইতিহাসে যাব, সেটা বলুন। ছাত্রীরা থাকতে পারবে কিনা? এই লাস্ট সেকশনটা হচ্ছে বিয়ন্ড দ্য ভেল। Rokea's first attempt to start a school was in Bhagalpur in 1909 in memory of her husband who had bequeathed a legacy of rupees 10,000 for the purpose. She was only 29 years old at that time and was forced to leave her marital home by her husband's relatives. In spite of the fact that she neither had a roof over her head nor any male relative to stand by her, Rokea dared to start a school for girls first in Bhagalpur and then in Calcutta. The Sakhawat Hussain Memorial School for Muslim Girls was founded in March 1911 in a rented room in Waliullah Lane of Calcutta with 8 students. Shortly afterwards, Rokea lost the 10,000 rupees with a crash in the bank where she had deposited the money. Undaunted, she tried to raise resources with appeals to the general public and to the government, and even tried selling her own collection of books for the upkeep of the school. With Rokea's door-to-door campaign urging her co-religionists to send their daughters to her school, where she had to assure Parda norms would not be violated, the number of students increased from 8 to 30 within 2 years, and the school shifted to a slightly bigger rented address in European Asylum Lane in 1913. In 1915, with as many as 84 students, it became an upper primary school and moved to a house on Lower Circular Road. By 1927, it had started upgrading itself to a high school with 149 students, ran a boarding for Muslim girls who came from several district towns, and sent up 3 girls for the university entrance examination in 1931. Finally, the school shifted to a bigger rented accommodation on Lower Circular Road in 1932, a few months before Rokea's death that year. Inadequate and intermittent grants from the colonial government and colossal indifference showed by most members of her own community, some of whom called Rokea a whore and an embezzler of funds, hindered the growth of the school. Parents would only send their wards if fully curtained transport was arranged by the school to ferry the students, and funds were a major constraint in getting adequate number of buses, which were looked upon as moving black holes by members of other communities. Lack of sufficient funds to arrange curtain transport resulted in slower intake of students, and those girls who sought admission here from other parts of Bengal had to be turned down due to lack of resources in running a boarding until the late 1920s. Besides, finding qualified Muslim women to teach in the school posed a great problem, but Rokea's repeated appeal to the government to set up a Muslim female training school finally yielded results in 1919. It was the founder's lasting regret that the school could not manage to have a building of its own in her lifetime, as a result of which all expansion plans had to be stalled. This happened in spite of the fact that the government appointed inspectors of schools for presidency and Burdwan divisions were of the opinion that Muslim girls' schools were not getting a fair share of grants when deposing before the committee to advise on advancing Muslim education in Bengal in 1934. This report is extremely important to see how funds were being denied to Muslim girls' education in late colonial Bengal. Between 1927 and 1932, Rokea left no stone unturned to get the government sanction a plot of land and funds for a school building. 4 years after her demise, Sakhawat Memorial finally became a fully government-aided school in 1936, and and moved to a huge colonial building with large grounds in 1937 at its present Lord Sinha Road address. It was open to girls of all communities after partition and did away with Parda buses by the end of 1948. A few years before founding her school, in the short story Shouro Jagot, set in Kurseong, Ruqya's protagonist Gauhar, the enlightened father of 9 daughters, had been keen to send his girls to the renowned Dow Hill School, but he was vehemently opposed by his brother-in-law Jafar, who detested the idea because it was sure to make his nieces acquainted with Islam and eventually turn them into Christians. It was precisely because Ruqya respected Islamic ideals, both through her writings and through her school, spearheaded a movement to grant women the rights conceded in Islam but not practiced socially, that a majority of Muslim families found Sakhawat Memorial School congenial for educating their daughters. One of her non-Bengali students, Husne Jahan, remembered having been pulled out of Eden School, Dhaka, and admitted to Sakhawat Memorial because her parents thought she might imbibe some precepts of Islamic culture at Sakhawat. Another student, Nasima Banu, who became Nasima De, and came from a well-educated Bengali Muslim family of Borishal, felt she and her sisters were sent to the school because her family was familiar with Ruqya's writings and agreed in principle with the way Ruqya argued for rationalizing the religion. So her first step was to adopt a policy of strategic compliance by maintaining parda throughout her life, though she didn't personally believe in veiling herself. She realized that it would be impossible for her to run the school otherwise, and in the process, Muslim girls would be much worse off without education, as the religiously endorsed seclusion of women had become a subject of intense anxiety amongst the Bengali Muslim intelligentsia, ranging from the conservative ulema to the more progressive liberals. Her options were limited by her gender position intersecting with configurations of class and religion at that point in history. During her lifetime, when she lived with her younger sister Humaira in the upper floor of the school building, her sister was entrusted with the responsibility of overseeing that the Sakhawat boarders observed 5 rounds of namaz every day. If Ruqya had not made arrangements for transporting her students in Parda buses and had not provided for daily reading of Quran in the school and a separate namaz room with basins for ablutions for day scholars as well as boarders, very few Muslim families would have sent their girls there. As far as the curriculum was concerned, Ruqya made no compromises, no matter what the Urdu papers wrote about her when she introduced sports and music in the school. Some old students of Sakhawat remembered that within the school grounds, they would run and jump and play and sing to their heart's content. In other words, do whatever was forbidden at home. Girls were not only taught compulsory English and could opt for either Bengali or Urdu. They learned maths and science, geography, history, and public administration, as well as darning and embroidery, drawing and music, and of course sports. They were also taken on excursions in the Parda buses to places like the botanical gardens and to women's inter-school sports held in other institutions. Teachers were mostly from communities other than their own, Christians, Hindus, Brahmos, and Anglo-Indians, who were affectionately remembered for not only inculcating in them a love for learning, but also for never looking down upon the students as culturally, within quotes, backward Muslims. The school taught the students to see the world differently from what they were experiencing at home and in their communities. This included not only having secular teachers as role models, but being exposed to a diverse range of literary and cultural activities, from performing Tagore's plays to reciting Ghalib's poetry, to taking part in inter-school sports and all Bengal needlework competitions. However, the Sakhawat students, those Sakhawat students came only from one particular religious community in pre-partition time. The Muslims in Bengal were not a monolithic group. Muslim girls from diverse backgrounds came to study here. There were girls from upper class families with landed and business interests, from families of middle class professionals, as well as a few from the lower middle class families. The upper class Muslim girls who came to the school in privately owned curtained horse carriages mostly belonged to Urdu-speaking Ashraf families who took pride in their Mughal, Persian, Turco-Afghan or Abyssinian origins. The middle-class Muslim girls, on the other hand, belonged to the overwhelming majority of Atrafs or indigenous Muslims of the region. There was both a class and a language divide between these two groups, many of whom also differed on the question of nationalism. When the school started, I'm not going into now because it will take time how the Muslims were Bengal during the time of middle class identity formation in the 1920s and 30s. They were faced with a difficult choice what to choose, their pan-Islamist self or their ethno-linguistic identity. So that debate was very much there. I am straight away going to the language question in Sakhawat, which very much relates to this question around identity. Rokia, who had always stressed on the ethno-linguistic component of Bengali Muslim culture and projected Bengali as the mother tongue of Bengali Muslims, had for many years tried to convince parents of her students that instead of parroting bad Urdu, Muslims from Bengal needed to be taught Bengali. When the school started in 1911, the medium of instruction was only Urdu. But since 1970, she made several attempts to introduce Bangla and make Bangla a medium of instruction parallel with the Urdu section. But in various phases, she faced different kinds of oppositions, and it will take time for me to go into all that. But the girls of Urdu-speaking families or their parents were not willing to let these girls learn Bengali, even if it didn't mean costing anything extra in terms of money, because it was thought to be un-Islamic. And the very few Bengali families who let their girls learn all subjects in Bengali were mostly students, daughters of government servants, who got frequently transferred from one district to the other and were only in Sakhawat for very short stints, because Sakhawat had not yet been able to start a boarding until the late 1920s because of shortage of funds. Rokia remarked that, quote, like meteors, these girls blaze forth the firmament of the school for a few months and then disappear altogether, unquote. These are the Bengali Muslim girls, Bengali Muslim middle class girls. But soon there was cause of hope as these girls started swelling the ranks since the school began to take boarders by the late 1920s. By then, more and more Bengali Muslims had begun rethinking the question of nationalism, started rejecting pan-Islamist ideals, and stressed on a change in attitude towards religion, morality, education, and the status of women. The school resumed a regular Bengali section parallelly with the Urdu section from around 1927, and a poem by the renowned Bengali poet Ghulam Mustafa was sung as the prayer song in the school assembly from that time. By the mid-1930s, Bengali girls were taking a lead in most cultural activities, including sports in the school. So the situation had reversed. It's no longer the Urdu Muslim girls taking a lead any longer. Old-timers who studied there in the 1930s and the 40s until the partition had told me that many Urdu-speaking upper-class girls were condescending towards the Bengali Muslim girls who they thought were not quite Muslims, for they wore saris, staged Tagore's dance dramas, performed Shukumar Rai's plays, and sang songs of Kaji Nazrul Islam and Atul Prasad Sen. However, with partition, most of these Bengali Muslim students of Sakhawat Memorial had migrated to East Pakistan, with many of their families supporting the Muslim League and its two-nation theory. Unlike Gokhale Memorial, the school itself went through a major demographic change with the migration of Muslim students and teachers to Pakistan, thereby being able to retain very few of them. And soon after, the school opened its doors to Hindu students who had migrated from the other side into India. It is beyond the scope of this talk to discuss the upheavals caused in Sakhawat Memorial School in the wake of partition. But it is worth mentioning that the Bengali Muslim students or former students of the school who moved to East Pakistan soon joined the language movement, and some of them took the lead in vehemently opposing the imposition of Urdu on Bengalis in East Pakistan. The secularist Rokia had succeeded in producing a generation of women who took up cudgels against silencing of a community by robbing them of the language they were born into. In conclusion, let us recall what John Eliot Drinkwater Bethune had voiced on the occasion of the opening of the Calcutta Female School in 1849. He had urged the young educated men of Bengal, quote, to extend the benefits of education to the other half of the inhabitants, unquote, so that suitable companions might, quote, increase infinitely the happiness of domestic life and be better equipped to perform their roles as enlightened mothers, unquote. I have tried to show that 50 years after Bethune's speech, educated women subjects of the British Empire and members of the colonized elite like Sharala Rai and Rokia Sakhawat Hussain were refusing to buy into the civilizing mission of colonialism and meekly imitate the colonial tropes of education. These largely self-taught educators didn't just remain epitome of feminine grace and virtue and compatible companions to their English-educated husbands as envisioned by the colonizers. The autonomy emerging out of education had enabled them to found institutions that assimilated the best of the West and the East and engaged with modernist preoccupations around pedagogy and a secular education. The schools, led by their founders, challenged many forms of cultural imperialism and resisted fundamentalist use of religion, which divided people in general and subjugated women in particular. It is also of no mean significance that their enormous contribution to female education was made with little or no dependence on colonial funding, and there is an urgent need to look more closely at the extent of Indian women's self-funding or independent funding of women's education. Most of all, the early histories of these two schools of late colonial Bengal make it evident that in order to retrieve the untold and multi-layered narratives of women who founded and nurtured many such institutions, it is imperative to not just rely on conventional archives, but search for alternative and marginalized sources of knowledge and to subject those to inventive nuance. Thank you.